Who emerges for the Denver Broncos after the trade of Shelby Harris to the Seattle Seahawks? The Broncos losing a veteran impact player on the defense. Who can fill that void? Could it be in-house? Could it be in free agency? We take a look at every option on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos country? Welcome back into a brand new episode, Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast here on the Locked on NFL Network, your team every day from the South Stands to the end zone. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, joined alongside by my co-host, Sayre Bedinger. Both of us, we cover the Denver Broncos for the Locked on Network and 9 News. You can get this podcast free and available everywhere you get your podcasts in audio format. You can watch us here on YouTube. If you're a brand new viewer or listener, make sure you hit the subscribe or that follow button here today so you never miss out on a day's worth of Denver Broncos news, content, and coverage. We want to welcome in a lot of former Seattle Seahawks fans, or we've got a lot of Russell Wilson fans now coming over to the podcast. Welcome to Broncos country. We are glad to have you here. Mile high salute. Welcome into the show here, Locked on Broncos. Happy Friday, wherever you're at, all across Broncos country. Sayre, my friend, hey, look, as we're all excited about Russell Wilson now being the quarterback for the Denver Broncos, he's got group chats going on with Broncos wide receivers already and players. He's excited. They're excited. And Broncos country's excited. However, through all the good news, we do have to address the void that is left by, obviously, the Broncos having to include Shelby Harris in that trade deal to the Seattle Seahawks, man. Kind of going to pay our respects here to Shelby and from his time in Denver, but then we got to focus on some in-house guys and what the Broncos can do to bolster defensive end in 2022.
Well, and that's on top or near the top of the priority list for free agency, right? I think there's a lot of potential options out there, and there are guys that the Broncos could really bring in. We're going to get into some of those names as the show goes along, but you're absolutely right. I mean, Shelby Harris deserves his due respect. I mean, remember all the way back to when Vance Joseph was having the time of his life against the Los Angeles Chargers. I remember very distinctly Shelby Harris being a major reason why Vance Joseph was having a time of his life. The blocked field goal back it feels like a lifetime ago at this point, doesn't it? But
Trevor Siemian juking out Joey Bosa for the touchdown in that game.
Man, do Broncos quarterbacks have Joey Bosa's number when it comes to just meeting him in open field? I think somebody got him this last year too. So
Teddy did. Yep.
Teddy got him. Yeah. So I mean, man, but yes, Shelby Harris, what an awesome story he is, going from being kind of just like a back into the roster guy, really competing just even for a job in the NFL, much less a starting position. And then he comes to Denver, and now he's known for having the best hands in the league, and he's chasing down Tyreek Hill against the Kansas City Chiefs and showing off that elite speed. I think the Seahawks are obviously getting a great player and somebody that I think is pretty well beloved in Broncos country.
Well, and the thing, too, I'll provide information. George Payton, I mean, it was a tough decision for him to make in this deal. Is somebody that the Seahawks wanted, and George was like, hey, we will be Harrison. So, obviously opportunity to get a franchise quarterback who can change things around. They include obviously a fan favorite in Shelby. I'll never forget the moment when he had the interception against Ben Roethlisberger several years ago. Right there, just a special moment in Broncos country. So, good friend of the show, Shelby Harris. So much love, so much respect for him. Always consider him a friend. He's been very good to me. Obviously, being a media member, and just we've had some really fun conversations, especially just a month ago in Los Angeles at Radio Row. It was really good to sit down with Shelby. So, best of luck to Shelby Harris. I know I'll be tuning into some Seahawks games to watch him, Noah Fant play, and Drew Lock, and obviously best of luck to all of them in their future endeavors. But, the question with the Shelby Harris trade now here, Sayre, is does this add more pressure onto Dre'Mont Jones? Now, last season for Dre'Mont was his first year being an actual starter in the National Football League. We knew how great he was as a rotational player in Vic Fangio's defense. In his career, he's got 15.5 sacks. He had 6.5 in a really limited role in 2020. Last year, he got the start, and he didn't quite have, I think, the season that he wanted to, but he was still disruptive, and he came away with 5 sacks last season for this Broncos defense. Now you lose Shelby opposite of you. Man, does this add more pressure, in your opinion, to Dre'Mont?
Well, I think it does add more pressure to him. It makes him really the guy, right, on the defensive line. So it feels like the Broncos are going to have to make some kind of move in order to just really supplement his talent to make sure that he's not getting all the attention on the defensive line. And we see, I mean, obviously there's certain players in the NFL that can, they can get through regardless, like Aaron Donald of the Los Angeles Rams. But Dre'Mont Jones not quite to that level yet. So obviously you need to get him some help on the defensive line there, especially because, like you said, I mean, he's been mostly a part-time player through his first 3 seasons in the league. But, man, he's been a great pick for the Denver Broncos. And I think back to last season, that moment against the Chargers, he just really dominated an entire drive. Just shut down a 3-play sequence all by himself. And he's done that a couple times. Remember his interception. Remember he was Defensive Player of the Week back in his rookie season against the Lions. So there's stretches of just purely dominant play from Dre'Mont Jones that we've seen. Now we do need to see that sort of consistency, or we need to see, we were all talking and hoping for that big breakout campaign. And I don't know if that means like we're expecting 10 sacks from him, or if that means we're expecting like 15 tackles for loss from him, or what the expectation is. But I think you're right, Cody. I think we expected a little bit more from him this past season than we ultimately got. Obviously, he battled through an injury like most everyone else on the team did, but he's still, he's still a guy that I think the Broncos should be very high on. It speaks volumes, the fact that he wasn't included in this trade, because he is, in my opinion, one of the best young interior linemen in the NFL.
Sayre, and I think you make some great points there too. Like you mentioned, he did battle through some injuries, but I think one of the things with Dre'Mont too, I think the question is, when you look at a young talent like him, as you mentioned, it was a surprise he wasn't actually included in this package. Part of me wonders if the Broncos, I know George Payton is very high on Dre'Mont, but maybe this move here where Shelby Harris is not there, maybe this does open up opportunity here for Dre'Mont Jones to really be the star on that Broncos defense. You and I have talked about it in depth here on the show. We believe that he is a young rising star in the National Football League from the defensive pass rushing position. Like, he can do it. And obviously what he did to Joe Thuney last year in the Week 17 regular season finale game against the Chiefs, that was dominant physical football. And I think when he's healthy, it'll be there. But the Broncos defensive line, I feel like, is probably the weakest point of their defense right now in terms of just consistency. We talked about Mike Purcell, who's dealt with injuries as well. Hopefully he can stay healthy this season. Who's the backup nose tackle behind him? There's a couple options we'll look at that maybe could fill the void here for Shelby Harris's departure from Denver. And we'll get that coming up here in just a moment. We're looking at some free agency options. But before we do that, Broncos country, let me tell you about the sponsor of today's episode of the show. It's our good friends over there, betonline.net. And football season is over. And it's that time of the year again as college basketball's tournament is finally upon us. And from the latest odds, contests, and player props, BetOnline is the number one source for all your sports betting needs and information. And BetOnline remains the best spot all year for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information needs, including live betting and your favorite Vegas casino games. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. And as we jump into the second half action on today's episode, Lockdown Broncos, happy Friday, Broncos country, wherever you are at. Thank you so much for making Lockdown Broncos your first listen of the day. Sayre and I have you covered with your morning cup of coffee, your commute to work, or even lunch in the afternoon. We love that you make Lockdown Broncos your first listen of the day. So thank you so much for tuning in. Broncos country. Sayre, we were talking about the impact of Dre'Mont Jones and really what it could do for him. It could mean a couple of things for him, but really opposite if the Broncos are going to go out in this year's NFL free agency and they're going to look at options to help out opposite of Dre'Mont and help out on the interior, especially against the run. Part of me is wondering, who would be the best fit? Like, there's a lot of veteran free agent options at defensive end that could be considered here. Dante Fowler Jr. was an interesting option, but he's kind of a little bit more of an outside linebacker as well. He can play outside linebacker, defensive end. I'm not sure he'll be much of an option here for the Broncos, but I do want to talk about a really good fit, in my opinion. I feel like Akiem Hicks, he may look to get out of Chicago. I mean, I know now that they have Matt Eberflus as their head coach. He's very defensive-minded, coming over from the Indianapolis Colts defense, and the defensive line that they had there was very impressive. Do they want to keep Akiem Hicks? Are they going to change the scheme? He is a 3-4 scheme, I think, dominant defensive end. And Sayre, I know the Vic Fangio tie isn't here anymore, but Akiem Hicks to Denver, I think I would certainly be on board with he opposite of Dre'Mont Jones.
I would too, and I think a lot of Broncos fans would, Cody. I think if you saw that name come up on, Adam Schefter's Twitter or Ian Rappaport's Twitter or Tom Pelissero, whoever else, come Monday afternoon, I think everybody's going to be absolutely thrilled by it. Yes, Akiem Hicks is on the, people want to say the wrong side of 30, which I'm pretty sure he's a day younger than me, Cody, which is humbling to even think about. I mean, he can grow a way better beard than me and all that good stuff. So, I mean,
I can't even believe how old I'm getting, but he's not on the wrong side of 30 because I'm telling you right now, it's the right side. Okay. But man, I mean, he would be a fun pickup, right? You're exactly right. I mean, he's a scheme fit, which I think is of the utmost importance here. But also, I think you want to have some additional veteran players on this Broncos defense that look like the departure of Shelby Harris and obviously the trade last year of Von Miller. What's one thing we know for sure about this Denver Broncos defense right now, especially with Kareem Jackson also being slated for free agency? This is a very, very young defense. So I think we are going to see a few veterans, especially with a young defensive coordinator, a first-time defensive coordinator, Ejiro Evero, and his staff coming in, a very young staff at that. I think we're going to see a lot of veteran additions to that side of the ball. And Akeem Hicks, he would be, I mean, ideal is maybe a strong word, but very close.
Well, I've seen some names thrown out too by members of Broncos country. Calais Campbell. Obviously, we've talked about the hometown ties that he has here in Colorado. But at this point, too, I think I'm a little hesitant with going with a guy like Calais Campbell. You know, for him, he also dealt with some injuries last season. But not only that, he's going to be 36 years old, Sayre. And I think for what this defense really needs, they really need somebody who's going to be a solidified anchor against the run, because the Broncos against the run, when some of their key guys got hurt last year, it was brutal. And we saw what happened. I mean, we can go back to the Las Vegas Raiders game, week 5, and then we can go to week 6 against the Cleveland Browns, the D. Ernest Johnson emergence game here. Several times the Broncos struggled against the run. Josh Jacobs later on the season when Denver traveled to Allegiant Stadium to take on the Raiders. That was another interesting point there. I don't know if Calais Campbell would add the value necessary for this Broncos defense, but then again, I could be entirely wrong. Do you agree? Do you disagree with me?
I mean, I feel like it would be sort of a farewell tour, right? If anything, like you said, he's going to be 36 this year. Yes, he's from Denver, so that connection does make plenty of sense. But at the same time, it's like, do we want to build something with some longevity, or do you want to bring a guy in just to ring chase? Because at this point, right, that's what Calais Campbell would be coming to Denver to do, and what we all gave him a lot of grief for not doing back in 2017 when he signed with the Jacksonville Jaguars. So he's obviously had an outstanding career. I think if he does want to play one more year, Cody, and he's not our number one option off at the defensive end position, I would say, yeah, go for it. If he wants to play another year, maybe 2 years, bring him in as like a rotational guy to come in and be a mentor for guys like Dre'Mont Jones and whoever else you draft. And another veteran name, I know he's not on our show notes, Cody, but another veteran name that I think gets brought up quite a bit almost every year because he's a free agent almost every year, and Ndamukong Suh, you know,
Yeah.
and I'm trying to think just of the coaching connections in Denver. I don't know if Ejiro Evero was in Los Angeles when Ndamukong Suh was there as well. The last time they made it to the Super Bowl, right? So I can't remember if they overlapped paths there or not. But either way, I mean, he's a player that I think will be on the radar for a lot of fans because he's one of the biggest names. But there's other names out there too that make plenty of sense, you know. And we've talked about obviously a lot of the veteran guys, but maybe some lesser known players. I think Sebastian Joseph-Day is a guy that I put on the list, Cody, from the Los Angeles Rams, who does for sure have connections to Ejiro Evero, to Marcus Dixon, the new defensive line coach. I think he could make plenty of sense.
Well, I think when you look at the options too, right? I think it makes more sense for players because I feel like for Sebastian Joseph-Day, he would probably look at it kind of what Von Miller's looking like right now. Do I go back to LA or do I maybe go to Denver? I mean, the possibility is, the endless, chance to get to the Super Bowl, I think, is amplified for the Broncos here a little bit. And obviously, there's going to be a lot of work that needs to be done in order for them to do that. Familiarity, obviously, is one thing there. So if Joseph-Day had a really great relationship with Marcus Dixon, who was the assistant D-line coach there for the Rams, now the official, as you mentioned, defensive line coach for the Broncos, maybe it could make sense for him to kind of branch out a little bit. There's also DJ Jones from the San Francisco 49ers. I know we talked about him in our free agency preview just a couple of months ago, kind of looking ahead here at some potential positions here. Who would have known that at this point in time, when we recorded then, this would be the reality for the Broncos right now. Obviously, for him, he's a very significant force. 17 tackles for a loss behind the line of scrimmage in 2021 and the last 2 years to combine. So in 2020, 2021 there, he's just an impact player. So if you want to run to his side, you're going to probably find a guy that's going to create disruption from the offensive line, the flow of the offensive play, whatever they want to do. But then there's also Emmanuel Ogbah as well, who's had a really terrific season here for the Miami Dolphins. Now, he's going to be in line to get a big-time payday. Do the Broncos go out and invest big-time money here at defensive end, specifically when edge rusher is probably a bigger need? DN is a need for this team, but not the highest need. Edge rusher is a little bit more important in my opinion. So it's like, are you strapped for cash here in a sense of where you can pay guys? So there's that, but there's also somebody who just played in the Super Bowl as well, Sayre, that is on your list. Tell us a little bit more about BJ Hill from the Cincinnati
Yeah.
Bengals.
Absolutely. I think he may have popped up in our free agent defensive lineman preview as well, just because, my brand of free agency, Cody, is typically not to go for guys that are my age, right? I mean, I don't necessarily want the Broncos to go out and get guys that are going to be 33 this season, even though I'm feeling really great about Russell Wilson at 33 going on 34. So that doesn't apply in every instance, but in certain cases, you just want to, if you're going to invest big free agent dollars in a player, I just figure, like, why not get a guy who's going to give you at least 4 or 5 years potentially, instead of a guy that might just give you 2 good years. So
Yeah.
BJ Hill is a guy that I think fits in that category in particular, who's under 30 years old. He came into the league the same year as Bradley Chubb, actually played with Bradley Chubb, Cody, at North Carolina State back in the day. So the Giants traded him for basically nothing to the Cincinnati Bengals last year, and he ended up playing a critical role for them, especially in the playoffs. So I think that's a name that definitely, I mean, the Bengals have plenty of cap space to be able to bring him back, but they also have a number of other guys on the defensive side that they've got to look at bringing back as well. So, and their offensive line, by the way, I think they're going to spend a lot of money there. So BJ Hill might be a casualty of their other needs. And I would say, I mean, the opportunity to start in Denver, it's going to be there. And it's kind of one of those things that's like, you get a young player like that who has a buddy on the team, presumably, in Chubb. And I mean, it kind of makes some sense. He gives you exactly what you're potentially looking for on the D line.
Well, and I think for him too, he inflated his value, I think, for free agency, because when Larry Ogunjobi went down in the playoff game against the Raiders, he came in right away. BJ Hill was an impact player in the postseason for the Bengals and was a reason they also got to the Super Bowl. So for him, I mean, you have a lot of options now. Like, you utilized your platform in the postseason to increase your potential value in free agency, which, it kind of pays off. However, if he wants to chase a ring, I mean, do you run it back here with the Bengals? Like you mentioned, they have a whole bunch of other needs, particularly on the offensive line, that they need to take care of, plus some defensive players they got to take care of as well. So excited to see what happens here if the Broncos look at defensive end in free agency. But now Sayre and I are going to shift our focus a little bit to some in-house options here for the Denver Broncos. Who could step up opposite of Dre'Mont Jones that is already on the roster? You get that and much more coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, let me tell you about the sponsor of today's episode of the show. That's our good friends over there at Built Bar, the best tasting protein bar that is out there on the market today, the healthiest protein bar that is also out there on the market today. And the bars are covered in 100% milk chocolate. They are soft, they are easy to chew, and you can get your hands on a box of Built Bar today by going to built.com. And you can see all the amazing flavors that they have. They have 9 amazing original flavors, plus they have the occasional limited time flavor like the puffs. Check out which flavors that they have there that you or your family would like today. And if you need a little bit of extra fuel to help get yourself through your day, well, they have you covered, because each Built Bar contains 17 grams of protein, 130 calories, and only 4 grams of sugar. And that is impactful for something that contains 100% milk chocolate. So find a box, find a flavor that suits you and your family's taste buds here today at built.com. When you go to checkout, make sure you use promo code LOCK15. That's going to get you 15% off your next order at built.com. Once again, promo code LOCK15 gets you 15% off at built.com. All right, Sayre, as we jump on the fourth quarter action on today's episode, Lockdown Broncos, taking a look at some of the in-house options here for this Broncos team to potentially fill the void that is left by Shelby Harris being traded away to the Seattle Seahawks. I think a big subject of discussion here in Broncos country is going to surround McTelvin Agim, who had an impactful training camp here in 2021 and was a preseason guy. He was on the active roster, but he was primarily on the inactive list on game day. And it was very surprising, I think, for all of us, because we're like, hey, we're seeing McTelvin Agim dominate at training camp. We're seeing him get in the mix and be an impact player. And all of a sudden, he's not getting time on game day on the 53 against teams that are very good against the run. Like, how come he didn't do that? And then the time, Sayre, where he would get thrown into a game on the active game day roster, he had an impact against the run. He helped out in terms of pressure, half sacks, like he was a contributing member. Is he ready to step up now and maybe be the starter opposite of Dre'Mont?
I hope so. I would love it. I would love to see it. And like you said, all signs last year were pointing towards Agim having a breakout campaign. I don't know what that was going to look like, whether he was going to play 50% of the snaps or something just hovering around there. But man, it was so disappointing. It was so disappointing to see him just not even sniff the field hardly, especially because it wasn't like the Broncos, they had some injury issues on the defensive line, right? I mean, Dre'Mont Jones was out for a bit, Mike Purcell out for quite a bit. Shelby Harris missed some time due to injury, and then he was on the COVID list, remember? And like it was just so odd to me that considering all the circumstances, that especially because of his big training camp, especially because of all the great things that all the defensive coaches were saying about him, it's shocked me, frankly, to not see him out there making a bigger impact. So to me, I think that yes, like I would absolutely say we can bank on some improvement in year 3 from McTelvin Agim. It's almost like he hasn't even been on the roster his first 2 NFL seasons, which is a bummer because of the potential that he has. But yeah, he was a former 3rd round pick. Like, you can't just throw that away. And so I think George Paton, even though he didn't make that pick, I think obviously that's a guy that you're going to get more into the mix going forward because of his athletic traits, his skills. I mean, he can rush the passer. He can anchor against the run. He can do everything that you want to do. So it's just a matter of, can you coach him up and put him in position to get that next contract? Because he's now only 2 years away.
When you also mentioned too, George Paton didn't draft him, right? But I think even though that George Paton has dealt with some guys that he's never had any prior draft allegiance to, right? John Elway drafted Agim. I think he's always been willing to give these guys chances to prove themselves a little bit. And I think for him, I think a lot of it was on the coaching staff. Now we do know that Coach Bill Kollar, he is a defensive consultant here now for the Denver Broncos, no longer the defensive line coach here. How much of that input potentially helps in a case for like McTelvin Agim? But there's also another guy that really stepped up. And if I'm not mistaken, I think he's a restricted free agent, which makes it a lot easier for Denver to bring him back. But Deshawn Williams, who's been this emerging guy, obviously a training camp superstar, going back to last year, 2 years ago, was able to get in and makes these diving athletic catches. And now is kind of also, even there was a game this year where he had batted passes down the line of scrimmage, and Shelby Harris himself even said, hey, he's got the best hands in the league. So could Deshawn Williams be ready to be that guy? And also there's Marquise Spencer, who was a little bit of a later draft pick here for George Paton as well.
Well, I think you've got to like at least the upside that you have there, considering the cost of both of those guys, right? I mean, it's not going to cost you much to bring back Deshawn Williams and just let him have a shot at whoever else you bring in to say, hey, go compete with these guys. If you can win one of the top 6 or 7 spots, however many D linemen we keep, that's awesome. And it's a bargain for the Broncos either way. And Marquise Spencer, obviously another guy like the whole 2021 draft class, it feels like a big-time athletic score coming out, but obviously just raw traits, not necessarily the type of consistent production that you want to see. But there are plays from him back at Mississippi State, and you turn that film on from Mississippi State, and he's just flying through the line of scrimmage like there's nobody even standing in front of him. So I think those are 2 high upside flyers on the Broncos roster right now, to be honest with you. And I think that they're worth giving a shot to. And that's not to say that, well, you should not bring in other guys, via free agency or the draft just because you have these guys on the roster.
Yeah.
Now, if you have a chance to get somebody that you think can be an upgrade, I would say upgrade. But at the same time, I think those 2 guys are worth bringing back, considering their price. They're worth throwing into the mix. Their athletic traits, like you said, Deshawn Williams made some standout plays, not only as a pass rusher, but also just in terms of getting his hand on the ball. He went from being kind of like in baseball, like the quadruple A player, right, to where he's not quite ready for regular MLB work and too good for triple A, to being finally he's in an NFL rotation. So I think that he's a great story and worth keeping around.
Well, as well as I do here, and Broncos country will agree, last year the Broncos' depth at defensive end was tested, and it was rough for a little bit. I mean, there were a couple of weeks in a row where like, oh my gosh, what are they going to do? Because the depth options just simply weren't ready. Guys were just playing hurt and playing banged up, and it made life a little bit harder on some of the younger linebackers that didn't have a lot of experience because the linebacker position was also decimated by injuries. So I do think it's important that the Broncos invest in depth here at defensive end this season. We even talked about it even when Shelby Harris was on the roster. Bring in somebody for depth because you will need it at some point. Will it be these in-house guys? Will it be an additional street free agent that maybe you're bringing in from another team? The opportunities are endless, Sayre, and we're just about a few days away now from the start of NFL free agency. What other moves will the Denver Broncos make? Well, we're going to take a look this week here, especially on Monday's episode, Lockdown Broncos. We're going to look at backup quarterbacks because now the Denver Broncos need a backup quarterback. They no longer have anybody on the roster outside of Brett Rippon, who's a restricted free agent. They'll more than likely bring him back, but is he a backup option here to Russell Wilson? We take a look at some scheme fits as well on Monday's episode of Locked On Broncos. Once again, thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode of the show. Thank you for making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day. You can get this podcast free and available everywhere you get your podcast in audio format, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can also get us here on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications so you never miss out on a day's worth of Denver Broncos news, content, and coverage. With that said, speaking for my good friend Sayre Bedinger, I'm Cody Roark. We'll see you on Monday for a brand new episode of Locked On Broncos.